And we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joyce, and welcome to Codementor Office Hours. So I'm really excited to be here today with Jeremy Wight. He's an engineering manager at InVision. And InVision, if you aren't familiar, is a prototyping, collaboration, and workflow platform for designers. And they're actually a fully distributed company. So Jeremy has some really great and unique perspectives on today's topic. So to get us started, Jeremy will be talking a little bit about our topic today, which is cross-team collaboration and communication. And we'll be ending with a live Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to just add them in the Q&A section under this video, and we'll get to as many as possible. So Jeremy, if you'd like to get us started, we'd love to learn some more about you and sort of more about the topic today.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. My name is Jeremy Wight. I am an engineering manager at InVision. Very briefly, InVision is the market's leading rapid prototyping and collaboration platform. So we create tools for designers and developers to prototype and collaborate on design and development faster and easier. We are also a fully distributed team, and so that shapes some of the ways I think about collaboration, and it creates an interesting dynamic there. So I've been in this role as an engineering manager for the last going on 2 years now, and I was also a PM, a product manager at InVision prior to that. Prior to that, I was a development manager building some marketing automation and business intelligence applications for the automotive industry. And then before that, I was helping to build some hardware, software tools to increase the engagement of the hospitality industry. So I've been doing management and development for quite a while. So hopefully, I know I still have lots to learn, but hopefully I can be of assistance in sharing some insights that I've gained in the past. So I'm really excited about this topic, specifically cross-team collaboration and communication. It is super critical for your teams, for your organization, and for engineers as you're moving into a more tech lead and engineering management role to be effective at. And it's one of the things that is actually, I think, easier in a lot of ways than most of the other skills that we have to have. And so some of the skills, so that leads into where I'm going to go here in a minute. Some of the skills that I'm going to talk about are going to seem super basic and super obvious, and that is actually true. But the reason that I'm calling them out is because I see a lot of times that they're missed or forgotten. And I think we underestimate the value of some of these kind of basic sorts of tools. So today we're going to, let's make sure this goes, there we go. Keys to effective collaboration: rapport, communicate early and communicate often, expectations, accountability. What can we cut? Other people might say prioritization should be a little bit painful. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about specifically the dynamics of product design and engineering. So again, rapport is one of those super basic things that seems obvious, but a lot of times we don't really have it. We might have it with our team directly, in some cases not, but sometimes we don't have it with the broader teams that we're collaborating with and working across. And so I think it's one of those keys to smoother communication. Informal communication in terms of a remote team like ours. It's really important, even more so I think than physical environments, because you don't have the natural kind of informal communication that happens, when you're playing foosball or going out for beers or even around the coffee pot or anything like that. And so you have to be actually more aggressive and more active in just building that informal communication, which then leads into easier communication and collaboration when you're actually doing things important. So some specific tactics there. One of the things that I do with even other teams that I don't collaborate with actively all the time is I keep ongoing kind of one-on-ones. Some of them are kind of recurring appointments. Some of them are I just make sure it's kind of one of my constant mental to-dos every couple weeks to grab 15 or 20 minutes with this engineer or engineering manager or on the product team or the platform team or whatever that might look at. In a physical environment, that might just mean dropping in, going down to their floor or to their general office space and kind of hanging out, chatting, right? Again, just establishing some of that. One of the things that I've done with my teams, which I think has helped in a remote context for my engineers specifically to feel like that those silos are broken down, is we actually every 3 to 4 weeks, my team and then another team, I'll get another random team together and we'll do a virtual happy hour. And so what that looks like is we just get on a video call with everybody's little box there, and everybody grabs whatever they'd like to drink, and we kind of hang out for 30 minutes to an hour, whoever's available. And it's not about work, it's not about status, it's just about kind of hanging out. We sometimes do some themes, like we'll do InVision cribs where people kind of show their remote workspace and things like that. But it's really, really awesome. It's created a lot of, again, it just breaks down those kind of natural silos and barriers that come to communication between engineers and engineering managers and all these different stakeholders. And so that's one way. But a little story about how I've seen this be really important is I was chatting just last month with a colleague and a friend who's also, he's a designer at a startup in the Bay Area. And he was having problems. He's like the director of design or something to that effect. And he was having problems with being able to communicate and effectively collaborate with his product management team. And one stakeholder in particular that he really needed to collaborate with well for them to execute on their product strategy. And so I just asked the question, when was the last time you guys actually just talked, grabbed coffee, grabbed a beer, anything like that? And he said, I can't remember the last time. I said, well, I would start there, because just by being able to communicate at all will open up and create a better relationship for you to be able to actually talk about some of these more important and higher level things. Build rapport, it's really important. Communicate early and communicate often, especially when you're collaborating across teams and doing some project planning and doing some of these kind of more complex technical challenges. Having a quick planning meeting earlier rather than later is going to make sure, and then making sure that you have ongoing weekly check-ins is really, really key. I've noticed this in my own failings in the past, where we had assumptions that things were happening, or that we didn't really need to share this information with another team. It just never crossed my mind that that would be valuable. And then found out 2 weeks later that, one, it was really important because they had some dependencies on some of the things we were doing, or some of the choices that we had made affected the way that they were going to implement some of the things that they were going to work on. And one, it frustrates, it makes it more difficult to deliver. And also in some cases, it makes people feel like you're intentionally like not including them in the process, which is totally oftentimes not the intent, but it's what comes across. So you have to really resist the feeling that you're bugging this person or this team by actually communicating with them and going to them. But one thing that I'll add to that, specifically if you're creating like meeting events, is to respect people's time, because we've all been in meetings, I'm sure, where you didn't feel like you really needed to be there and you were just wasting your time. So the biggest way that I coach my engineers to combat this when they're doing some of these things is to make sure that you put appropriate detail in the meeting event with appropriate links, and set the expectation that people have actually looked at it first before the actual meeting. Because then if it's not relevant to me and you may not know, they can just not attend, or they can mark no, right? But if you don't add that context, they won't have that option. And once you're in the meeting, it feels awkward to drop, right? Then specifically in meetings, when you're communicating sorts of things and you feel like decisions have been made, this is a super basic tool that really, really helps. Is at the end of any meeting, make sure to verbally restate what was committed to, right? Like everything that you understood just got committed to and expressed, restate that so that everybody gets to adjust what they understand, or it just creates a better level of clarity. That will help going forward as you're wanting to hold people accountable and setting clear expectations. It's going to make that easier and easier. And that's where that expectations comes in, right? Like if a lot of times issues that happen in cross-team collaboration is a misalignment of expectations. And so again, when you're in a verbal meeting, Ideally, you will take the notes on, somebody will be taking notes on what was discussed, and then also specifically on what was actually agreed upon, and then post that in a shared location. I'll hold back from saying like a public place, but like some document and some location, not just that you're aware of, but that everybody is aware of. And if you're using Slack, if you're using HipChat or whatever source of communication you use, put that in your team's shared channel, so that you're like, hey, at here, you know, this is what we discussed and this is what we decided on, and here's the notes, right? One, this helps you and the members of the team that you're working with. The other thing is this is part of it, is oftentimes you have outside stakeholders who are not needed during the actual meeting, but they may need insight into what the output and the decisions that were made there, or if changes were need to be, you know, adjustments to scope or schedule or whatever, to again set clear expectations with them and make sure that they're understanding what you have decided. Make sure to share those with them. Send an email. Hey, here's the meeting notes. You know, we had a couple of key points. You know, here it is, just to keep people informed. Again, it'll just create a better collaboration across team, and it really clarifies the expectation of all teams and the scope that they encompass, right? Like what things explicit we've agreed to, and what the expectation is. Because the next thing is that now you can hold people accountable, and that is an important part of effective cross-team collaboration and just delivery, right? Once you've established those clear expectations, be gracious with people. Don't be a jerk, right? This is something sometimes we have to check and ask other people how we are coming across, but at the same time, we need to hold people and teams accountable, which I realize with software development is difficult, right? It's messy, right? We don't always get our estimates right. Things, you know, happen, right? This, you know, SDK that we're using is behaving oddly, and we have to figure out what's going on, which is, again, going back to the last one, why communicating early and communicating often is so important. Because if you're in the middle of a sprint or in the middle of the progress, and you don't have your next meeting scheduled for another 4 or 5 days, if this is something that at all could potentially impact them and their schedule, communicate it, right? Say, hey, we're having a little issue with this thing. I expect that we're going to finish and it's going to not impact things, but I just want you to know, because again, this is where one, you set clear expectations and you help to keep people's communication clear. And then also, this might be an opportunity to go, oh, well, that's not really that big of a deal. Like that specific feature or that thing that we're building, we can really cut that from the scope. You might help clarify really what the priority of that thing is. And that's really valuable, right? What can we cut? Like the scope of what it is that we're trying to build or deliver. It's all, you know, time. We're always talking about time and scope when we're building out projects. And so for engineers to understand this as we're designing things and coming up with these timelines, is the priority clear to everyone, right? Do we have the clear priorities on what we're doing? If we do we understand the prioritization of each of these sub features, right, or points that we're building? And is it clear across the teams that you're collaborating with? Is everyone have the same prioritization and clarity that we do? And if so, you know, can we take this to other people to determine what things that we may be able to adjust to be able to make the timeline? What other resources can we get from another team, right? When we're holding people accountable, you know, and we're realizing there's a problem, you know, perhaps if we can't cut scope, if we can't change the timeline, if they really are fixed and hard, what other resources can we gain, right? These are sorts of communications and things that maybe go beyond the scope of you. But if you're communicating and you're collaborating with another team, you know, if you maybe report to different stakeholders, maybe you can get them to come together and put this priority for the business and give you greater clarity to understand, can I adjust other assets on other resources and team members to this thing so we can get it shipped on time? These are all the kind of conversations you can have as you're beginning to collaborate better as a team. It just, the more insight and the more communication you have about those sorts of things, the faster you're going to be able to make those key decisions and be able to make changes. So the last thing that I want to really talk about is product design and engineering. Obviously, every team and organization structures things a little differently, whether everyone is reporting through product or everyone is reporting through engineering, or if you've got lines kind of segmented across those, it will change the dynamics. But I think one of the key things and the values that goes across to whatever your organizational structure is one, helping people everyone, all the stakeholders on the team, on a single team, whether product design or engineering, to be thinking about the value that we're delivering to users, right? If we're always thinking in the terms of like, what are we actually trying to deliver to the user, and we're thinking about and feeling empathy for our users, if we can use that as a guiding principle, it will help everyone to make better decisions, right? Because in all cases, whether in product design or engineering, we have things that we're going to tend to do which are going to naturally maybe not, they're not going to be the user's best interest, right? I'll give you some examples, right? Taking too long on refactoring or reworking this code, or not doing enough testing, right? Like on both ends, right? Like maybe we do too much in over engineering this feature, which especially if you're in a startup, in 6 months, it may not even be used anymore, right? We may determine that users really don't need this feature and it's not that important. And so we might build the greatest function ever and it might be completely reusable. But if in 6 months we determine that whole thing is going to be cut, then it really doesn't matter. In the same way, if we're building things too quickly and not actually taking time to create, automated tests, then we're gonna hurt the user in the midterm, right? In the same way from design, right? Like if, are they spending a lot of time on making things just pretty, or trying to, do things that will help them and their kind of career and resume in terms of the design community, right? Can we help them to understand and be thinking about and feeling empathy for the user? Because if this doesn't help the user's experience, or specific metrics that are going to help us succeed as a business, why are we doing it, right? Product is the same, helping them to really feel a little bit of pain in their prioritization so that you guys can, as engineers, can build things faster, right? And build things that are more clear and discrete and get them out into the hands of the users faster. So thinking about these things and then helping others to, communicate the value as engineers, communicating it to your fellow engineers, as engineering managers, communicating it to your engineers, to your product teams, to your design teams, constantly re-communicating and re-clarifying in people's minds, why are we doing what we're doing? What is the value that we're bringing? And how can we impact the users? And then also thinking about what the specific, put yourself in the shoes of a product manager, of a designer, of a fellow team member on another engineering team. What are their personal priorities and their team priorities? And how can you help them be successful at those at the same time? And you will help to build, more rapport and a greater collaborations. I think one of the kind of final key things that I want to talk about as engineers that you can do, which is really key as you become an engineering manager, is one of the things that we need to do is we need to be able to clearly communicate the trade-offs to product and design. When a designer comes to us with a specific design, and maybe this pattern doesn't match exactly kind of the material design patterns or some of the built-in functions that we can leverage to make things faster, it's up to us, because they won't know that, to communicate to them, hey, I see that this transition is on this certain delay, right? If we change that, if we tweak that slightly, we can do that. But that means we're going to have to build the controllers and the views manually. But if we can change that just a little bit, we can deliver it to you 30% faster, right? Like, these are key pieces of information that we can give to them as engineers and engineering managers to help make the best decision possible, again, with keeping our users in mind. And that is a key value. If you do that, you're going to create influence with those team members, because you're going to help them to succeed, to build the things and ship the things faster and better. And then also you're going to create stock with stakeholders, because you guys are shipping and delivering faster. The last thing I want to talk about is when you find that there's pain, because every organization has pain, typically the problems that if you're frequently being blocked, or you're having the other problems, they're usually system and process problems and not people problems. And we need to be thinking that way. It's not just like this person in the most case, right? And most of the time it's not. And thinking about how we can be problem solvers for those sorts of things. What sort of solutions, not just going, I see a problem, but thinking about how can we create solutions that will solve this systematically, right? Like if you're thinking about, do we have alignment issues? Do we have visibility issues? Do we have direction issues? Do we have prioritization issues? External team demand issues? Asking these sorts of questions and beginning to try and come up with solutions that can alleviate these sorts of pains that many development teams face is going to, again, these are key values that you will bring to the organization as you're moving from more of the individual contributor role to a more engineering manager, and specifically working with these teams and other teams as well. So hopefully some things in there were valuable for you. And that's pretty much what I got. Any questions?
Awesome. So you mentioned that, engineering teams at InVision, or you mentioned to me earlier that both engineers and you have designers on your team. So can you share a little bit more about sort of what your your team looks like at InVision and what engineering at InVision sort of is structured?
Yeah. So I didn't mention this, but I specifically currently lead our mobile development team. And so we're fully distributed. And I was sharing with Joyce earlier, like we literally are distributed. I have people in Europe, in Canada, in the United States, all over the United States, in London, in Budapest, in Argentina, right? Like my team is really all over the place. And so, that's what my team looks like. And the way that we kind of function is that we have an engineering team, and the engineers report to the engineering manager report, right? But then I can still consider my larger team. So these people don't report to me directly, but we are all accountable to one another. We have a product manager and a designer. In this case, at this exact moment, our product manager and designer is split across 2 engineering teams, which isn't exactly ideal, but it is what it is at the moment. So we try and keep our teams we try and minimize cross-team dependencies as much as possible, right? Which makes some of these challenges a little bit easier. But the reality is it doesn't matter. You're always going to have some dependencies, whether it's a platform team who's developing a new JOT-based authentication system or whatever, right? You're always going to have those sorts of things. But we try as much as possible to kind of follow the concept of every team as individual startups within larger organization, so that we don't have to worry about things like funding and things like this, right? We can just execute really well, but we try and keep our teams very, very nimble and agile with minimizing those sorts of dependencies.
Great. So I guess in your experience, what is the relationship between engineering managers and product managers usually like? Sort of how do you co-work with that?
Yeah. So again, I think our goals ultimately should be the same. And that's a key point, is making sure that we have alignment on what is going to make us successful, right? Partly because of my background as a product manager, I very much I'm constantly thinking about how are the choices that we're making as an engineering team going to affect our users, and then our business metrics, right? That we know that affect our users, right? Ultimately, if we're not successful long-term, we're going to impact our users negatively, right? Because the people that love us, we won't be here to support them, right? So we have to think about those both. But if you can try and think in those terms, I understand that as engineering managers, we have other considerations, right? We have technical considerations, we have platform considerations, we have velocities considerations, we have people considerations. But if you can keep in mind what it is, if you can determine what your product manager needs to be successful, and with them, right? We technically, in the strictest sense, the product owner is the product manager in our context, and typically that is. But I see myself as a shared product owner with my product manager, which really helps them, right? Because I can ultimately, he has the final say. In this case, it's a he. In some cases, it's been a she, but he has the final say. But like I'm going to really push if I feel like there's something that is wrong with the decision being made. And that's a value to them because we're going to make better decisions as a team. And hopefully you're creating that kind of collaborative environment where you're really able to support one another and be really effective where, you know, if they're not able to do some user research and you have a little bit of time, can you do a little research? You should be looking at the product metrics, right? You should be looking at what makes your product successful and pointing those out to the product manager because they might miss them. Again, like I look at that as a really tight collaboration.
Great. So I guess a lot of like this is a question we get quite a bit, especially for developers, you know, who want to move into like a lead developer role or a senior developer role, and they sort of, you know, they want to know like what really are the differences between being an, you know, individual contributor and actually being a manager and you're leading a team. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it is fundamentally a different role, right? It's a different job, and that's, I think, maybe in my experience, the hardest thing for most engineers to understand is you're no longer judged when you move from an engineer to an engineering manager. You're no longer judged on your personal output, right? You're judged on your team's output, right? And what your team can deliver. And so you have to release some of the details that you would, as an engineer, be naturally focused on, which will be difficult in a lot of cases because that's your comfort zone, right? Like that's the thing that you have always excelled at. That's what the people, you know, and you like to build things, right? Most likely, because that's why most engineers are engineers, right? And so you have to think about this differently, that your output is really based on your team and how can you help your individual team members to be really successful. And as you're transitioning, I think as a key takeaway for people that are transitioning, be thinking about that now, right? Like support your, you know, whatever the roles are, if it's engineering manager, project manager, or whatever, right? Like support them in these sorts of things. How can you, while still delivering on the things as you are an individual contributor, while still delivering your things, how can you help other people to be more effective? How can you help drive greater alignment on what we're building, greater speed, right? Like all these sorts of things. Can you be looking at product metrics and pointing things out to your engineering manager and your product manager, right? Can you start to pick some of those things up now? One book that I highly recommend, it's pretty basic, but it's right here because I still reference it, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. This doesn't matter what role you're in. This is a really great book. It's just basic skills for creating relationships with people, which really helps in this kind of collaboration and growth.
Okay.
If that answered the question, if you have other questions about that, I'm happy to dig in more.
Sure. What does your usual day-to-day, or I guess like in a week, how is your time split between your different responsibilities, and like what does that look like for you?
So like, what does my day-to-day look like? So I'll just kind of run through you just like a mock day, right? That I kind of look at. Typically I try and make sure, now I'm really trying to train up my engineers to be engineering managers. And so I do a little bit less of this, but it's looking at product metrics. Like that's one of the first things I'm going to do. I'm going to look at, obviously we have automated monitoring. So one of the things that shapes my perspective also is that we expect, which I think is a really great thing, we expect our engineering teams to also own and operate the thing in production, right? So after you shift something, you own it, right? It's not thrown over the wall to DevOps or SREs or anything like that, right? And so we have to make sure that our team, that we've created good software and good systems to make sure that we know when things do, you know, happen. So typically I don't look anymore every day at my product health dashboards or excuse me, like engineering health, like New Relic or Datadog or anything like that, because our alerting is really effective. We've just gotten to the point where it is. When it was earlier on, I would look at those first thing to make sure that something didn't get missed, right? But then also our product metrics, making sure that, you know, our user growth and our atomic use cases are moving forward. So I'll look at those, do stand up, make sure that everybody is aligned, that if anything, sometimes I'll meet with my product manager first for 10 minutes just to make sure that we're synced up if any changes have occurred in the last day that I need to be aware of. So when we run stand up, we can give that context. Make sure that my team is moving forward. We might have an engineering planning or a sprint planning meeting where we're, kind of breaking down the next set of work and features that we're doing. Doing one-on-ones where I'm talking with my engineers, specifically giving them clear and specific feedback and helping them to, move towards their goals, which are in most cases either greater technical advancement or greater management advancement. Working with them, and then working cross team, right? Helping other teams to make sure that they're executing well, making sure that I'm in the loop on what's happening on the platform side, making sure that I'm understanding what's going on the product side and shifting business priorities so that I can help inform my team so that they're making the right thing and making it with, the best context as possible.
Great. You mentioned, like one-on-ones, and I think, we've heard from, a lot of managers that one-on-ones are like a really, really key sort of tool in their arsenal when they're leading a team. So can you sort of talk about like how you do your one-on-ones and sort of how you structure that?
Absolutely. I think it's really valuable to understand what is it that the engineer desires, right? One, giving them a framework to succeed in, and then helping to understand what are their goals, right? Like, what are your goals? Do you want to be an engineering manager? Do you want to be a principal engineer? Do you want to go into product management, right? Like, what is your real desire? If that's not just an engineer or a senior engineer or just along the technical track, that's okay, right? I want to know that because I can't help to guide your path well unless I really understand what it is that your values and desires are. So figuring those things out first, and then the first thing I typically do is ask them how they feel like they're doing along that, right? Like, what are their own goals? I do set the expectation for my engineers that like no one, and I think this is a great thing to know just generally as people, that no one is going to execute on your goals for you. You have to own your future, right? And so what are you doing? Like, if you want to grow more I have an engineer, for example, that wants to learn more about machine learning, right? We aren't in our team specifically really using that. But it's like, I'm excited because that's going to bring greater diverse insights into our team, and I'm going to support you in it. And I'm going to help give you some time and give you some resources to make that happen. But ultimately you have to do it, right? So I'll check in with them with their goals, and then I'll give them some very specific feedback if there's events where they've really excelled, or where I feel like they're falling short, and or where they're just misaligned, right? I try and do those things as close to the action as possible to help people to understand. Like, really, I can think about it. If it's a week later, I may have forgotten the richness and the depth of the context of what something occurred in. So I will, if I see somebody doing something really great or something that's really along my goals that I know that I'm trying to build them up in, I will directly message them and say, hey, I noticed that you did this. This is awesome. I want to talk about that a little more in our one-on-one, but I just want you to know, like, this is exactly what I'm looking for, and think about that and use it more, and also spread those things more. But these sorts of tools, keeping people aligned and helping people to move forward, but it comes down to really watching and giving clear and consistent feedback so that nobody is surprised, that everybody's moving forward, and being direct and honest with people about the things that they're doing well and things that they need to improve.
Awesome. We have a question from Daniel asking, like, how do you deal with your first failures? And I guess more generally, like, how do you deal with failure in general?
Yeah, well, we all fail. So I don't know, I guess I don't know what specific sort of failure you're thinking about, right? But we fail on projects, right? We fail sometimes with people, right? Like, we make the wrong decisions. I think these all happen. And so I personally am always just trying to learn from the things that I'm made mistakes on, right? When I realize that something has failed, I hope that my managers are giving me that clear feedback just to make sure that I know, right? Like, I will typically tell them, hey, we missed the mark here, or it's reported in our status updates if it's a project sort of thing, or, but ultimately, if we're handling, I think in a mature and a healthy organization, we're handling failure well, but we're also handling it quickly, right? Like, if we never fail, that means we're not taking big enough risks, right? We're going to fail, but we can also contain the size and the scope of that failure, right? With doing it wisely, right? Like, are we beta testing this? If it's a feature, right? And this, either one is behind timeline or just didn't operate the way we thought it would, or had, more bugs than we expected? Did we put it into beta first? Did we put it behind a feature flag so we can turn that off to limit the exposure to our users, right? And then RCAing that. I will say, from a cross-team collaboration, one of the things that I've found really valuable, that was honestly something that I just started doing with my teams, because it was coming from this kind of thought of, when we're not effectively, when we just don't hit the mark really well as a team, but even when we do, doing cross-team retrospectives, just to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity to go like, oh, well, this is my perspective on this. This is your perspective on it. Now I understand, right? Like, how could we have done that better in the future? So learning from those sorts of mistakes as a team, and having a culture that is, building and developing a culture where it's okay, but that we don't want to keep making the same mistakes if at all possible. I hope that answers your question or helps.
Awesome. So I guess my next question would be like, how do you, like as a team, how do you balance sort of development speed and like shipping fast and sort of code quality? I think this is something that a lot of managers, and I know like our personal team also has like, it's always like a very tricky balance. So like, what is your take on this?
I love this. This is one of my favorite things, because it's so important. And if you get good at it, you can be like, people will think that you're way better than you are, right? That's me. I've got a lot of people fooled, right? Being able to make that balance, a lot of it comes down to communication of expectations, right? And then building things well. So one of the things that I make sure, and sometimes we do fail, right? Like, but that my engineers have the expectation that, one, driving the expectation that you own this in production, right? Like you own the thing that you built, right? Driving down ownership to people will cause people to produce better. I understand that can weigh too far on one end of the spectrum, where people go too slow, they soft sell, their estimates are too large, kind of thing, right? So, but if we're working together as a team and we're really going like, is that really the best that we can do with this thing, right? Like, how can we do it faster as a team, right? This isn't some external person going, but me as the manager and a member of the team going, how can we do this better and faster? If it really can't be done any faster, then it is what it is. But then that comes down to, again, a lot of this is perception. Like, are we communicating really what we expect to deliver on and delivering on it to stakeholders, whether it's product or C-levels or VPs or whatever, right? But so I want to make sure that my team is following best practices, right? That we are building automated unit tests, that we're building automated functional tests, that we're building deployment pipelines so we're not wasting time. And this is one of the things that will get you value quickly. If you can invest just a little bit of time to set up automation so that you're not spending time doing the same things over and over and over again, and you're building consistency in your process so anybody can walk in. One of the things that we did is we built, so again, it's even more difficult in mobile than just typical SaaS, the rest of our team is, because we have more complex pipelines for builds and deployments. But even those, we've used some different tools. Right now we use a tool called Bitrise, which automates our unit test and deployment process. We can build not quite all the way to production with Apple because of their restrictions, but we can with Android, right? So we've done those things. So those sorts of repetitive tasks, when I first started with the team, there was a lot of question about, okay, what's actually made it to production? What's in this build? These tickets, right? We took the time to build an integration with Jira, an easy integration with Jira, so that when the build completes, it marks the ticket, it puts the build number in there. So it's really explicit. There's no question. A product manager, a project manager, myself, another engineer doesn't have to ask the engineer who did it, is that in this build, right? It's right there. It's super clear. And then when we mark it as done, we just create those sorts of pipelines that will make things much, much faster, and that you won't have to keep repeating those tasks over and over and over again. So hopefully those sorts of things, if you're doing that well, you're actually creating velocity within team, these processes that you're doing, and then you're building accountability into the process with your team members, and you're trying to execute as quickly as possible, and then communicating clear expectations to outside stakeholders and creating that sort of cycle.
Great, thank you so much.
It started raining. My window was
Oh,
open.
okay. Wow.
Thank you, wife.
So I guess my next question would be like sort of tools and software help you personally succeed as an engineering manager? And also, since InVision is a distributed company, what tools and software do you use company-wide? I know you mentioned Slack earlier, which a lot of startups use, that we use as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we pretty much live on Slack, right? That's our primary form of communication. When it rarely, but it does occasionally go down, it takes a few minutes for us to adjust and go, oh yeah, how did we do this before Slack? Which there are ways, it's just a lot more painful. So we're constantly communicating in Slack and spinning up channels for specific things that we need to talk about, whether there's a cross-functional or whatnot. We use Jira to track, epics and sprints and specific features. I've used Pivotal Tracker in the past as well. I like them both. They're just a little bit different depending on the use case. I think any tool could basically be adjusted to the team if you think about it well. We use, like I said, we use Bitrise for my team specifically for our mobile automation. We use all of our code is all of our local development all the way to production is on Docker. We used to use Vagrant. We had a lot of, again, talk about velocity, taking time to spin people up and having differences of environments. That's a constant time suck. If you can invest the time to get, a good, consistent local environment that looks the same in your testing environment, that looks the same in your production environment, you're going to save a lot of time. So we use Docker. We use CodeShip across the platform for building and deploying. We have built an internal chat bot based off of Hubot, which is an open source tool to manage a lot of our ongoing functions. That includes deploying. Anybody can deploy services. We have a queue that builds out when we actually need to queue. In most cases, we're completely decoupled from one another. So you just go. We call our chatbot Rosie, and we say Rosie deploy, and it actually grabs master, it merges it in, it builds it, and it tells you when it hits staging. You test staging, tells you when, you say, yep, looks good, let's move to production, builds and deploys to production. If you see a problem, you can roll back via Rosie. So these sorts of things have made us just much, much faster. We use Zoom for video calls because we used to use Hangouts and we were seeing more problems. We use Google Drive, obviously. We use Dropbox Paper, which has been recent, but it's been really a really cool tool that we're migrating more and more to. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
A small smattering.
It's really interesting to hear about the chatbot.
I love that. I make additions to it as well to help streamline other processes like onboarding and finding documentation and things like that.
Yeah, like our team has been sort of looking into sort of trying to do this and sort of you can do more. You can actually do a lot through Slack, we found, and like we're trying to do a lot more of that to like sort of help speed up, everything from like HR to like finances to everything. So
yeah, build failures. When a build fails, it tells a Slack channel, so we know, right? Yeah. Everybody can see it.
Yeah, exactly.
All that stuff.
Yeah. So I guess my next few questions sort of have to do with hiring, and sort of I'm curious like what your role in the hiring process is, and sort of what do you look for when you're hiring developers?
Yeah, so I'm pretty engaged in hiring. I have, we're hiring now, by the way. We're always kind of hiring. So I'm constantly involved in that process. So it depends on what whether I'm interviewing an engineering manager, whether I'm interviewing an engineer for my team or another team. But basically we've iterated on our process lots of times, but we kind of do a panel interview where a panel as in a set of singular interviews all in a row, kind of like if you were in a physical location. After you've gone through the screening, you would go into a physical location, you plan to spend half a day or a day there, right? We do the same thing remotely. So we'll, set up 4 interviews with a lunch in between. So, and we kind of go topic based. So I will be asking questions about, from an engineer, I'll be mostly focused on communication and collaboration, understanding of just kind of general agile processes, obviously making sure that I think that their technical chops are up to snuff to send only to the point to send them to my engineers, right? Because my engineers are essentially responsible. They're going to be their teammate in most cases. So I will leverage my engineers to do the technical evaluation, and we set the expectation that the people that we're trying to hire, and it's a humbling and fun experience, but we're trying to hire people that are going to make us better. And I know a lot of people say that, but we really mean it. So if we don't all pretty much all at the end of the conversations feel like we're going to grow and learn and get better from this individual, then we typically pass.
What are some of the challenges that sort of goes hand in hand with this, since you guys are distributed? Like, are there specific things you look for, and like in terms of like personality or like while they're interviewing?
Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty easygoing culture, easygoing with a caveat that we like to succeed and we want to win. So, I mean, that's pretty easy to tell just from talking to people in my experience, right? But communication and their ability to communicate is really important, right? Because especially in a remote context, like you can't be a solo developer. It just doesn't work, right? You have to collaborate. You have to be able to present yourself, at least well enough. I'm not expecting engineers to be, when we hire them as project managers and things like this, right? But do they understand how to deliver things well? Because ultimately, when you get, we're hiring mostly senior engineers, and I expect that by the time you've spun up on my team, which I set very clear expectations and we help deliver on those expectations, that within 2 weeks, you've delivered something significant to production for our team, right? I expect that you've committed something by the end of week 1. I expect that you've shipped something valuable by the end of 2 weeks. And so by the end of 3 months, you should really be pretty ingrained in understanding of what we're doing. And that at that point, I expect you to be able to kind of operate as the little P product owner, where you're thinking about your like the product that you're managing or the feature set that you're managing. And so I'm looking for people that are thinking that way, that get excited about really getting to be a part of building something great and thinking about that and iterating on it and leveling up a product. I get excited just talking about it, because to me, like that's what I want. I want more people like that around me that are going to push me to be better. And that's what I'm looking for in an engineer, at least indicators of that, right? Indicators that they really like, not just that, oh, I just want to go make this thing, right? But that I really think about how I can build products and how I can deliver those well and build them well.
Are there any specific red flags you look for?
Primarily, again, their personality, right? Like it's either this person is a jerk, they malign their former company, right? I'm sure we've all worked at places that are difficult. I know I have, right? But how do you represent that to people, right? One, what do you like when I or a recruiter asks you, really, why do you want to work here? If it's if it's really just, oh, I just want to work remotely, you're probably not going to fit for our team, right? Like that's a red flag for me, right? Like, and that's not a complete thing, because I want to work remotely. I like working remotely, but it's not the primary reason that I work at InVision. I love the product that we're building. I believe in what we're doing, and I believe that we're literally creating value and designing the future of our world by creating tools for designers and developers that are building the future of our world. And I want more people around me who are trying to do that. So red flags are like, what are your motivations? And then obviously, technically, if I'm looking for an individual contributor, if my engineers don't feel like you're going to, again, raise that bar, then that would be a red flag.
Great. I think we're gonna try and wrap up soon. I don't want to take up too much of your time, Jeremy. So I guess my last few questions, like to you, sort of like what is like the ideal team culture, just not just for your own team, but also company wide. And you mentioned stuff like virtual happy hours earlier. It's like, what are some of the things that you guys do sort of build that culture?
Yeah. So I'll start with the first question, which was what do I think that is, and then I'll talk about how I think we try and build that. To me, it's about, I think it really, culture is really just a set of practices and kind of hold below the surface, right? Like of those values, right? And so I believe like the best culture is one where we have alignment of both of value and vision, right? Like that we understand and believe in what we are doing. We understand why. I know that this is an ideal state, right? And there's always differing degrees of this, of understanding for it, especially at each level as vision kind of gets bifurcated as it goes down, right? But do we believe in what we're doing and who we're building this thing for? And do we understand what that is? And having that kind of desire builds a culture where people have empathy for users and want to deliver the thing that they're building. So I think that's a core thing. And then like I want to execute quickly, and I want to execute well, and I want to have fun doing it, right? Like it's not always fun, right? Like there are obviously times where just is like this is a job, right? But do you, for the vast majority of the time, really get up in the morning going excited about what you're going to build and deliver? And so the things that I try and do to push that out further to my team and to the organization at large is I try and remind people of that frequently, weekly, bi-weekly, hey, you have 1,440 minutes today to deliver. Everybody has the same 1,440 minutes. We believe in you. I believe in you. Your teammates believe in you. Go do it, right? Like reminding people of those sorts of things, creating opportunities for people to engage and understand and ask questions when and creating a culture of openness where people feel like, hey, we're not really adhering to that value very well that we hold in this area, and this is why, right? Like being able to create a culture where people can bring those things up and we can actually have an honest dialogue around them, so like I'm trying to facilitate that for my team. I want to actually care and know about the people that I'm working with, because I do care about them. I care about their future, their growth, them as people, as well as them as engineers and our organization. And I think, actually just taking the time to build rapport, again, going back to those things I talked about, building rapport, talking to people informally, like actually finding out what people's passions are, those go a long way for building that type of culture in any organization.
Awesome. I think your video has cut out, but that's fine. We're wrapping up anyways.
Sorry. I don't know what's going on.
No worries. Yeah, so if the audience doesn't have any more questions, I think we're going to wrap up. Jeremy, did you have anything you wanted to add or sort of final words?
Oh, I thank you so much for letting me do this. Again, if you aren't familiar with InVision, go check it out. If you're an engineer, we are hiring. If you're an engineering manager, we are hiring. If you're a product manager, we are hiring. So we'd love to chat with you. Thank you so much. And if you have additional questions, I'd love to be a resource.
Yeah, I'm going to send out a recap email to everyone, sort of with a few links and also a link to InVision as well. Our team actually uses InVision as well. So it is a really great product. So please go check it out if you don't know what it is. And we also have actually one more engineering management related live event taking place next week. So also link to that as well. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for joining us today. And thank you everyone for joining us. That's it for today's office hours. Take care, everyone. Bye.